Welcome everyone from the Rex and Alice Media Martin Center here on the campus of the University of Notre Dame. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. Please know that we are sending prayers, as always, to you and your families. And we're experiencing some very difficult times as a nation and as a global community. Obviously, the coronavirus pandemic has posed all kinds of challenges for all of us. The economic crisis, with over 40 million members in our country being unemployed, has caused a very significant duress for many families. And then, of course, more recently, this terrible racial unrest that has been stimulated by some horrific incidents in the last couple of weeks. It reminded me of a quote from Holocaust survivor and wonderful writer, Nobel laureate, Elie Wiesel. Elie Wiesel says, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of beauty is not ugliness, it's indifference. The opposite of faith is not heresy, it's indifference. And the opposite of life is not death, it's indifference. So I think in a particular way, individually, at the family level, and collectively as a Notre Dame family, we are called to move beyond any level of apathy and to take action. Action, in the words of Father Soren, to be a force for good in society. And we need to dig deep to figure out ways in which we can reach out to those who suffer from racial prejudice, or those that are living on the margins and are struggling today, or are experiencing the disconnectedness and the health effects of this pandemic. So today it's with great pleasure that we welcome somebody who is making a tremendous difference in her life and in her work. She just recently was promoted to be a full professor of psychology here at the university after 11 years. Her name is Kristin Valentino, and she is the director of the wonderful William J. Shaw Center for Families and Children here on campus. Actually, children and families, I think, is the correct order. And so, Kristin, we're really pleased to have you with us this morning. And I'd like to begin with a question. Before we talk about the Shaw Center, tell us a little bit about your own background. Where did you grow up? And tell us a little bit about your own educational path and how you chose to pursue a career in clinical psychology.
Sure, and thanks for having me, and thanks for offering that beautiful reflection. I think it was really appropriate for the context and the setting, and thanks for the nice introduction. So yeah, I grew up on Long Island in a family that really, valued family and really valued education, and they worked hard to make sure to support my education. And so I ended up going to college at Georgetown University, and initially I was on the pre-med track, but in my freshman year, I took an introduction to psychology course, and I absolutely loved it and started thinking about psychology and what a career in psychology might look like. Over my time, I eventually took a class called Developmental Psychopathology. And this class actually inspired a class I teach here at Notre Dame, where I had the opportunity to mentor a child that was in a local psychiatric facility. And through my interactions with him, I really came to understand how he had this extensive abuse history, and I was able to see that he just really struggled with his family, and there didn't seem like there were that many services that were really focused on his family. And I just kept thinking, like, more could be done. We could do so much more for these children. So I ended up deciding to pursue graduate school at the University of Rochester. And, I went to work with a mentor who was really focused on the broader field of developmental psychology, but studying child abuse and neglect and family processes in particular. And so after I received my degree there, I also did a postdoc at Yale Child Study Center where I learned more about child traumatic stress and also about the development of evidence-based interventions for those families.
Fantastic. Well, it's a beautiful arc in terms of your career path, and it all makes good sense. But then I understand that it might be race cars that helped to move you from Yale University to relocating to Indiana. Can you tell us a little bit about that kind of curve in the track, to be very corny?
So, I mean, I'm just a girl from Long Island. I didn't know anything about racing except that I knew that my husband had a history of being a race car driver as a kid. But you know, when we got here to Notre Dame, my son was really little at the time, and he has just loved racing from the start. He's now 11, and this is also my daughter here, who is 8. And you know, he just wanted to race so badly. So eventually, he talked me into you know, letting him give it a try, and I figured just get it out of his system. But he's just a natural. He went from being a rookie to you know, competing at the highest level and national level in just a couple of years. So I mean, bottom line is that he just loves it, and I'm happy to support him in trying to achieve his goals, which he keeps crushing and setting new goals. And so now you can see my daughter is into it, and my youngest daughter, who's going to turn old enough to drive a race car, is already planning on it this summer. So you know, racing wasn't part of my recruitment here to Notre Dame, but I think my family really appreciates that that Notre Dame brought me to the racing capital of the world.
Fantastic. So Indiana is really, you know, the capital for something here, car racing. But people must be asking you the question, or in their minds wondering, you're a developmental psychologist. How do you let your kids race cars? Tell us just a little bit more about that. I don't want to dwell too long on this subject, but was it hard to get your hands around that at first?
I mean, I think it's like any sport. I mean, it does seem potentially a little bit more dangerous, but you know, I really looked into all the safety gear that they're wearing, and I watched a lot of racing, and you know, ultimately it's a really safe sport. And so my role really on the race team, I can't contribute to helping set up the cars or make them go faster, but I enjoy that there's a lot of life lessons out on the racetrack. You know, you can work hard, and you know, sometimes things just don't go your way and you get sent to the tail, and you have to, you know, just, you know, let your emotions not get the best of you and get back to work and keep trying. And we always say, like, every lap matters. And I think it's a good metaphor for, you know, for life, and developing a strong work ethic. And so although I was reluctant to get started in allowing my kids to race, I'm totally their biggest fans now. Fantastic.
So you've been here at Notre Dame for 11 years. It seems like you found a home at Notre Dame. What for you is a special draw to Notre Dame to do the type of teaching and research that you do?
Yeah, I mean, so my research focuses a lot on family processes, and I study really vulnerable populations, in particular kids who've experienced abuse and neglect. So I've always felt like Notre Dame's Catholic mission is just a really great fit for my work. I don't think there's anywhere else where I would have as much institutional support, and also I would say like a true interest and passion from students who want to work with me and who have the same interest and commitment to trying to serve the underserved, and learning more about what we can do to use science to help support children and families. And then, you know, in addition to that, having the William J. Shaw Center for Children and Families here at Notre Dame was also a huge draw for me. I really liked that there was a center here that was focused on research with children and families, that was located in the community. And so I also found that to be a major draw for me.
Fantastic. Perhaps some in our viewing audience have not heard about the William J. Shaw Center for Children and Families. Can you tell us a little bit about it? What does it do? Where is it located? How all-encompassing is the research and services that you focus on?
Yeah, so we're located, as I mentioned, in the community. We're about a mile off campus on Ironwood Drive, and all of the research and the clinical work that we do here at the Shaw Center is focused on supporting children and families. So in terms of our research, most of our work falls within four broad themes. So that's adversity, including things like exposure to child maltreatment or intimate partner violence. We have faculty who are studying healthy development, both in terms of physical development and emotional development, social development, cognitive development. A third theme is supporting relationships. And then another broad theme is translational work. So that's when you take your research and you try to use it to inform the development of new clinical interventions or programs that can really support families. So another way that might be helpful to think about the type of work that we do is thinking about basic research and then clinical research and then clinical services. So the basic research is the type of research where, we're working with families, studying them over long periods of time, trying to understand, what are some of the processes or the mechanisms that explain how something like the experience of child maltreatment or intimate partner violence, leads to negative developmental outcomes for kids. And then, once we identify those processes, in the clinical research that we do, we try to build programs around targeting those mechanisms that we just previously identified as having an important role. So, if we've understood that the way that parents communicate and resolve conflict is really important for children's emotional security, we have faculty who have developed interventions for, teaching parents more constructive conflict techniques. And then the last bit of work that we do at the Shaw Center is clinical services. So, so that's really the ultimate goal of a lot of this work, is to be able to provide direct services to children and families in the community who are seeking, therapy services, family parenting services, or also to, be able to provide some comprehensive psychological evaluations.
Fantastic. Could you give us a little bit of the scope of this? Like, how many faculty would be involved? If you have a sense of how many undergraduate students and graduate students are involved through the Shaw Center, and then in a year, how many families or individuals do you reach out to locally through your clinical services?
We have many faculty affiliates. In terms of the really core faculty who are running some major projects here at the Shaw Center right now, there are about five large projects with five different PIs. Actually, almost all of our projects involve more than one of our faculty members, and each of those probably involve 2 to 3 graduate students, and then anywhere from 10 to 15 undergraduates. So, we're working with quite a few students all throughout the research. And I think our latest tally is that we see somewhere around 500 families in our research this year, also in our clinical work as well.
Right. Fantastic. I've certainly met a number of students who have talked about psychology majors, and I know we have a number of students who are majoring in psychology, but even beyond, have talked about their work and the practical application of their studies in partnership with you and your team at the Shaw Center as being really vital to their educations. Tell us a little bit more about the type of research that you've done. Has there been something that you'd like to highlight that has been really a breakthrough and has had an impact on the way we deliver clinical counseling?
Sure. So, my work, as I mentioned, I study child abuse and neglect and family processes. And so one thing that I've been really focused on is trying to understand what are some of the parenting processes that explain why children who've experienced abuse or neglect may have trouble in terms of, other areas of their development later on. And so one process that I've identified is really important is how mothers are able to talk with their children about their emotions. And, based on that work, which would be an example of some of the basic research that I was discussing earlier, I developed an intervention that was aimed at trying to teach mothers who have abused or neglected their children, skills for improving how to communicate with those children about their emotions. And then we've, tested that. Actually, it started with a small grant from ISLA that allowed me to get some, pilot research done to show initially that this intervention was feasible. And that gave me the data that I needed to be able to apply for federal funding to run a large randomized controlled trial of the intervention. And then subsequently, we've been, interested in understanding, does this intervention make a difference in the long term? And we were able to receive additional funding to continue following these families 5 to 6 years later.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us an example of like what is the intervention? What is it that you came up with, and not to get too detailed, but an intervention that you've been able to pioneer through the Shaw Center?
Yeah, so what the intervention does is really teaches parents some basic skills about how to talk with children about their feelings, and how to do that in a way that encourages children to express themselves, and also teaches children how to understand and cope with their emotions and to resolve negative emotions. So we often talk about teaching kids or parents the ABCs, and the A stands for asking lots of open-ended questions.
Mm-hmm.
The B stands for building on children's responses. So when they answer your questions, to, follow their lead, add more description and detail. And then the most important part is the C, which is to communicate about feelings. And so we teach moms to, help identify the feeling that the children may have been feeling. Like, I think you were feeling sad in that moment, and I could tell that you were feeling this way because, and then also to talk about how they resolved feeling that way. So, what did they do to feel better? And, the extent to which they can do all these skills is important for teaching children how to understand their own emotions, how to cope with those emotions in the future. And so as we've been studying this intervention, we've been able to see that, following this brief training and this brief intervention, that mothers really improved dramatically in their ability to communicate in this supportive way with their children.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're seeing some really exciting findings in terms of, how the children are then doing. So we see that they have improved emotion knowledge and improved emotion regulation skills. So, that's really important for coping.
Mm-hmm.
And then even a year later, we're seeing some significant changes in children's stress physiology. So we've measured their stress physiology through looking at hormones. Mm-hmm. And we're able to see a year later that children are showing a healthier profile of physiological regulation after having participated in this intervention. So we're really excited about that, and excited about the potential of this intervention being, useful and being disseminated more broadly.
That's wonderful, and we often hear people speak about the fact that the family is the building block for the unit of society, and to see the work that you are doing to try to strengthen children and families is really important. I also don't think that there's a family out there that has not experienced some mental health issues within their family unit, and have struggled as a family to kind of respond accordingly. And you see this in a concentrated way with especially a lot of members who are families that are socioeconomically disadvantaged, and they don't have the kind of services that many others with means can access. How do you keep from being overwhelmed? How do you keep from letting too much despair set in, and keep doing this kind of work with maltreated children on a day-to-day basis?
I mean, I think the families that we work with are really inspiring. I mean, they can be challenging as well. But I have a really great staff of, we call them family coaches who deliver the intervention. And so one of the, I think, most important things that we do is, have regular meetings and supervision and support one another. And as long as you can step back and sort of see the bigger picture about what we're doing, and, seeing the success stories or the positive examples are really rewarding and, make it feasible to, also push through the more challenging situations. I mean, I think we realize that, families where abuse or neglect have occurred is, that's definitely a family where you're just going to go into it expecting that some of those families might have some challenges interpersonally. And so as long as you can anticipate that and, keep remembering what we're doing and, always trying to respond to our families with support and respect, almost all the time it ends up, that we end up getting that family to, respond pretty positively to us as well. And it's very rewarding, especially now that we're starting to see the kids. So the intervention I designed was for when they were preschoolers, but now we're seeing them when they're 8 to 12 years old coming back to the lab. And so the relationships that they've built with my staff, and it's just really rewarding to see how these kids are doing, 4, 5, 6 years later.
Fantastic. It's sacred work that you're doing. So how do you take these interventions that you pilot on the local level and then scale them to have an impact nationally or more broadly?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, after you do a randomized controlled trial, the next step is to try to see if you can teach somebody else to deliver your intervention and get the same effects. So that would be an effectiveness trial. And that's sort of where this particular project or this intervention is right now. I'm working on trying to, see if I can have others deliver the intervention and achieve the same positive outcomes that I achieved when I ran the study myself. And then, from there, once you have that evidence, then, we feel pretty confident that it's something that's going to be useful and that you could, disseminate nationally. And so that's sort of been a goal in the back of my mind, is trying to think about how could I design an intervention that's meaningful, but also could be disseminated and could be really scalable. So I intentionally design the intervention to be brief. It's only 6 sessions long, and it's delivered by just bachelor level staff. So folks don't need to have a lot of extensive clinical training to be able to deliver this particular intervention. So I think both of those things help keep the cost of the intervention down and make it so that it'll be a lot more feasible and that we could move this intervention into the community a lot faster.
Fantastic. Well, there's no doubt that that the impact of your work in the Shaw Center has had a huge impact on families that are in need and are trying to search for constructive coping mechanisms to deal with their challenges. But I believe it's had a huge impact on our students as well. Could you say a little bit about how undergraduate and perhaps PhD students have been impacted in their own development through the Shaw Center?
Sure. One of the things that I really enjoy about the Shaw Center is that we have a summer internship program for undergrads, and it's an experience that we provide where students could work across a number of different labs rather than just working with one professor primarily. And I think that that's been a really valuable learning experience for a number of students who are trying to decide, if they're interested in going to graduate school in clinical psychology or developmental psychology, or if they might want to become a social worker or, think about different career paths. And, so the labs and research that we have going on at Shaw allow students to have exposure to lots of different types of families and challenges. So I've talked a lot about families where there's been maltreatment, but we also, work with families where a child has an intellectual or developmental disability. There's quite a few students who've been interested in that. And some of our faculty also, focus not just on the mother-child relationship, but also studying the father-child relationship. And so students have, really had the opportunity to, work across a number of different studies. And I think that has been helpful for their discernment process and in sort of figuring out what field they want to go and what questions they want to pursue themselves.
Fantastic. So you recently were appointed the director of the Shaw Center for Children and Families. Already a lot of great work is being accomplished, but what is your vision for the future? How do you imagine have an even a greater impact going forward?
Yeah, I mean, my goals are to continue to grow the Shaw Center. We really want to continue to grow our research and the impact of our work and to grow the reputation of the Shaw Center. I mean, I really think that we could, be the premier um, developmental and clinical research facility for children and families nationally. And so we really want to grow and continue to move in that direction. And another goal that I have is for us to really substantially increase our clinical services. So we're really strong on the research side, which makes sense at a research university. And I think that we could also do more in terms of providing direct clinical services through the Shaw Center to children and families in our community, and to having our graduate students have an important role in that.
Fantastic. I know that where you're located is really important because it's in a part of the city that's right on the bus line, so it's easily accessible to families here locally to be able to reach out to your services. Another question that I have is that I know that federal funding, and you use the example of getting some pilot money internally from the College of Arts and Letters that led to a large federal grant. My understanding is that within the broad scope of the College of Arts and Letters, that the Shaw Center now is bringing in more federal research money for the work that you're doing than any other entity within the college. Could you tell us a little bit more about the impact and the importance of federal funding for the work you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, that's right. We're really proud of our grant record. We think it really speaks to, the quality of our work and the potential impact of our work. And, the reason I think that we've been successful in, getting this federal funding is that the work that we're doing is answering really important questions for, child health and family health, public health. And it's innovative in trying to develop new interventions that, could be scalable nationally. And it's really collaborative. So, all of our projects involve multiple faculty members. And so, the success that we've had in federal funding has, obviously been really helpful in supporting each of these individual research projects. But, it's also just really allowed us to create a robust research profile and research program at the Shaw Center. And, and that allows us to have Notre Dame have a stronger voice in terms of, influencing policy and, influencing what type of research is happening in terms of children and families, across the country. And so the funding has been really important for, providing the resources for us to be successful in these individual research projects. And, our, next important goals are to try to create some clinical services that are, equally impactful.
Right. Fantastic. There's next question, I guess, is on two different levels. The coronavirus pandemic has seemed to impact every facet of our society. How has it impacted the work of the Shaw Center on the first level, and then on the second level, how have you seen it impact perhaps stress and anxiety within the families that you have in your studies or you're offering clinical services to?
Yeah, I mean, so the pandemic has had a big impact on, the work that we do here at the Shaw Center. We prefer to work with families face to face and either go to their homes or come here, but obviously that's not, possible at this time. But, we actually have been able to respond and, change our methods and pivot pretty well to be able to still continue working with our families. So in a number of projects, the research has pivoted to using telehealth methods so that we could, video conference with families and deliver interventions over Zoom. And, we've also been able to do the same thing with our child and family clinic. So we're still able to do individual therapy with the same clients that we were serving previously, but to do that mostly over telehealth as well. So, while certain things have definitely needed to be on hold, I've been really, happy to see the number of things with a little creativity that we can still accomplish from afar. And then in terms of, what we're seeing over these past few months and the impact it's having on children and families. I think this isn't coming specifically from interactions with any particular family, but I think that we know that the stay-at-home orders and the closures of schools have created a lot of challenges for families, especially families that are already struggling financially.
Mm-hmm.
And this is really a time for increased risk for child abuse and neglect, and also
Mm-hmm.
increased risk for intimate partner violence. All the factors that we know about that can kind of exacerbate those issues are really, are really exacerbated themselves, right? So there's more financial stress, there's not childcare, where families aren't able to access the same types of social supports and things like that. So, so that is a big concern. Although I have to say that we've been contacting all of the participants in my particular research study and trying to see how things are going with them.
Mm-hmm.
And, for the most part, people, there's definitely some elevated stress and anxiety. The biggest concerns are, worrying about how to deal with e-learning and, make sure their kids are staying on track educationally. But, at the same time, I also do see some positives. In the community, I've seen and been part of, efforts to try to think about, now that kids aren't in school, who could be our new front line in terms of being able to identify abuse and neglect. If teachers aren't the ones who are able to do it, how can we involve other community partners and train them to be able to identify signs and get kids the services that they may need. And I think families too are seeing that they're appreciating some of the additional family time that they have. And, and it's a good time to just reevaluate and reset and sort of think about what are the things that are most important. And, once everything had to stop, I think families had a chance to maybe more mindfully decide what do they want to put back into their lives once everything reopens up.
Yeah, there's no doubt that I can see it within our own team that the parents with young children, especially multiple young children at home, you can see the effect of the stress of not having breaks and not having the regular routines and so forth. And I can only imagine that the clientele that you work with, they've experienced increased stress and I'm glad that you're still through the telehealth operations able to reach out to them and keep them included. So finally, a question that is near and dear to my heart. Share with us what do you think are some of the funding needs for the Shaw Center for children and families, and that will allow you to reach more and have a greater impact going forward?
Yeah, I mean, Shaw is really dedicated, like I was saying, to research with supporting children and families. That's our mission and Notre Dame's mission. And so, in terms of our needs to support those goals, we could use support for some new clinical faculty, especially those who could allow us to see more clients and expand our clinical services, supervise our graduate students. We could use some support for some new facilities so that we could really expand our capacity, funds for student research support. We also have, just programming and operational needs. So, we have some big aspirations and ambitions, and, we could definitely use some help in getting there.
Yeah. Well, Kristen, I can't thank you and your team at the Shaw Center enough for the vitally important work that you do every day. And it's a wonderful combination because you bring both clinical services and research and the education of the next generation of leaders who hopefully will pursue the field that you've chosen in clinical and developmental psychology, and will make an impact in their communities throughout the country and the world. It's sacred work. It's modeled after what Notre Dame stands for, a university devoted to our mother, Notre Dame, the patroness of this institution and the family unit that needs to be invested in and supported and researched and strengthened if we're to be the kind of society that we'd like to be. So thank you again for the great work that you're doing each and every day, and our prayers will be with you and your team and with the clients that you see, and hopefully we can provide additional support for you and your work going forward. I just want to let everyone know that next week at the same time at noon, we're very excited to interview the Dean of our law school, Marcus Cole, who is completing his first year as Dean. Just wrote, if you haven't had a chance, please go online and look for Marcus Cole's letter that he has written in response to the latest racial violence and unrest. It's an amazing letter that you'll want to read, and if not, just join us next week at noon and he'll talk more about his vision for the law school, which will include some ways to respond to the current crises in which we find ourselves. And finally, as we always do, let's join together with Kristen and all of you in a prayer to Our Lady. And we remember especially all those that are affected by this pandemic in any way, those that are affected by this economic crisis, and especially those families that are living in fear and with additional anxiety due to all the racial unrest and discrimination in the country. So together we say, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Take care. God bless. Thanks for being with us.